The only way we have now of getting our hostages back is by upping the military pressure on Hamas. That's worked twice in November. No other method has worked so far. And so we'll have no choice but to go into Rafa and to continue the battle.
The US President Joe Biden's warned Israel that the US is going to stop supplying it with heavy bombs, artillery shells, if it goes ahead with the operation in Rafah. Currently, Rafah's sheltering over 1 million people. Let's get the view of Michael Oren. He's former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Michael, what do you think, first of all, of what the president has said, that if the weapons are going to be used in this form, I'm not supplying them?
I think it's a very unfortunate and dangerous precedent. It's a message of vulnerability, of Israel's vulnerability to the entire region. The Biden administration is very concerned lest the United States be dragged into a regional conflict. This is a pretty good way to get dragged into a regional conflict. Hezbollah is going to internalize, Iran is going to internalize that Israel is vulnerable and they could attack. We're being shelled continuously from the north. We've had soldiers killed all this week up north. A very delicate situation. And then the United States would get dragged in. At the same time, there's a message to America's allies around the world. Is America a dependable ally? You could be in the middle of a desperate battle. And Israelis overwhelmingly view this battle as a battle for national survival. And the United States is not going to stand by. It's going to cut off the weapons and the weapons and ammunition that it itself subsidized. It's kind of an absurd situation.
The US have been extremely clear for weeks now that they wouldn't be able to support a ground operation like this. So they have been consistent.
And they've been consistently wrong. What can I say? Listen, I have great respect for the president. I work very closely with him and with his staff. But what can I say? It's ill-conceived. And as I mentioned, a dangerous precedent. Listen, Israel made what even Secretary of State Tony Blinken called an extraordinarily generous offer to Hamas to release hostages in exchange for ceasefire, exchange for prisoner release from Israeli jails. And Hamas simply turned it down. The only way we have now of getting our hostages back is by upping the military pressure on Hamas. That's worked twice in November. No other method has worked so far. And so we'll have no choice but to go into Rafa and to continue the battle.
I mean,
and if the United States doesn't give us munitions, we'll use whatever munitions we have.
The different options available right now, and whether there is sort of a diplomatic option or renewed conversations of a ceasefire. I wonder, your job about improving diplomacy, relationships, conversations, contacts, how unhelpful is it for Israel's national security minister to say Biden loves Hamas?
I hadn't heard that quote. If he actually said it, it's very regrettable. I think he should apologize. It's not true. Biden does not love Hamas. I think he's misreading the situation here. And it's, as I said before, it's very delicate and very dangerous also for America's position in the world, allies, including the United Kingdom.
Our lines just started to distort a little bit there, but thank you so much, Michael Oren, for your time. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States, on the repercussions, really, of the US president saying, if you go ahead with this operation in the form you're suggesting, we won't supply with heavy bombs or artillery shells. Clearly a complex situation.
This is as far as he's ever gone, or further than he's ever gone before, when it comes to linking munitions supply to actions of Israel.
Well, I haven't covered the region for that long, so I don't have that long of a memory. But as an American, I can say this is the first time I can remember that we have ever played this game with an ally and been so committal. He's getting specific about the weight of the bombs that he's going to prohibit Israel's use. And why now is, I think, the question that we're going to see this morning, this afternoon in Israel. The commentators, I'm sure, are going to light their hair on fire because they have been over the last several days about the prospect when the Secretary of Defense, Austin, was saying that they wanted more firm committals about civilian safeguards in Rafah. And the U.S. has been for weeks raising the red flags that they were trying to get this Rafah operation to change, or to the plans they were receiving they weren't comfortable with, what have you. But unbelievably remarkable. And again, the timing. Why is it happening now when potentially the ceasefire deal again is? We don't know exactly where it's at, but we know that the teams were still meeting. The Israeli delegation was in Cairo yesterday. They're apparently pulling hairs on the language of what a ceasefire is again, which is something we thought they had somewhat resolved. Does this embolden the Hamas position a little bit in the middle of these negotiations? That's, I think, the question that Israel will be asking, or at least stating today.
And it strikes me that the key phrase in that interview is population centers, because in my mind, Israel had gone into Rafah because they've closed the crossing. But his point was that Israel are not allowed into the population centers. Well, that's precisely where they've gone for the entirety of the war in the rest of Gaza. They've basically said Hamas conceals itself within population centers in order to go after them. We'll do our best, we'll evacuate, we'll give warnings, but population centers are where Hamas is hidden. We need to go precisely at those. And Biden seems to be saying unequivocally, those targets, which you regard as serious military targets, are now off limits.
And, one of the commentators from one of the local Israeli channels the other day was commenting on the Secretary of Defense comments when they were saying they might withhold precision weapons, precision bombs. One of the Israeli commentators said, I don't understand. Do you want us to use unprecise bombs? Yeah. Do you want us to use the big bombs that explode and blow up entire blocks? Because the Israel case is, hey, we've been conducting a targeted campaign. We're calling families or people on the ground beforehand, warning them if they're not affiliated with Hamas and saying, hey, get out of the area, take your children and go. In fact, this week, Israel released recording of a phone call that they said was proof or evidence that, they are providing this warning to some of the civilians in these areas, and that some of the civilians just aren't taking the warning or saying, we'll stay and you cannot bomb this location. So Israel's been putting out all this material saying, we are doing everything we possibly can to prevent needless civilian death. We're giving the right warnings, and then we're using precision weapons to strike precision areas to eliminate Hamas XYZ figure, whichever of the day it is. And their images, or the talking points now, are that if this changes, what does this look like? I know the images publicly that we've all been seeing have been these massive explosions blowing up entire buildings and city blocks. So when they tell us that they're using these precision weapons, they don't provide a lot of visual evidence that that's the case either.
I guess the question is, what does Israel do? Does Israel have enough munitions to go ahead anyway? Does it have enough global political credibility to go ahead without America? I mean, what happens if there's a schism here? What happens if they go, well, we take that point, Mr. President, but we are going into Rafah. We are going in, as Netanyahu said they are going to do, we are going to go into population centers. We've got enough material now. What happens then?
I don't even think that President Biden could back up this threat domestically. With his political base and the support for Israel, I see Democratic senators coming out, coming for the president on Twitter this morning, and that's the kind of thing that I don't think you could really have this kind of a hard line against Israel inside American politics, both left and right. I don't know that he could. So Israel is going to do what it's going to do. They've continued to show that. Whether the U.S. is standing in lockstep with them or not, they're performing their own actions in the region. So, yeah, it's a good question, but I just don't see where domestically the president has this kind of support to say as much. But he does control all this kind of military movement. So at least in the interim, it sounds like this will be the threat of the day.
The question is, of course, with Biden, we never know this, that how much he actually wants to say precisely what he ends up saying. So has he sat down and thought, I need to get the message out there? There is a red line. That sounded like a red line, didn't it? We are not providing munitions to go into population centers in Rafah. The question, I suppose, is, did he mean to go as far as that? And if he did, that all the effects that you then talk about will follow.
Yeah, I watched the interview. It was fairly lucid from President Biden, who did not make up one of those, famous Biden uh-ohs. I would say that on the inverse, to the point I just made about domestic political support for Israel, the electorate, the people that are going to be voting for him in November, I think they are so scared of the polling data that they're getting. That shows how deeply unpopular this is. I think this is a direct result of the campus protests as well.
Yeah.
You know, they've got how many signs have I seen of Genocide Joe, or a light beam shining against an American flag on the backdrop of one of America's famous campuses with Genocide Joe and his picture written across the side of the building. I mean, that's the kind of thing that's been playing on American television on loop for days. So I would imagine that this is the reaction to that, of they're trying to tell the American public, the Biden administration at least, that, hey, we hear you, we are taking some action, we're trying to correct our allies' already reckless actions.
Yeah, that's so interesting, the effect of the campus protest. I'm sure that's probably right. Zach, great to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much.